Hi, I'm Geoff Plays Guitar, and you're listening to Cloud Content.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Cloud Content. In this episode I sat down with Geoffrey Day, also known as Geoff Plays Guitar. Geoff is an extremely talented and aspiring games composer, and is currently most known for his most recent Doom Eternal style remixes of popular gaming soundtracks. In this episode we talked about all things music composition, how Geoff got into music, why he decided to return to YouTube just over a year ago, and where he hopes to bring his channel and content in the future. With that being said, if you have a guest you'd like to be featured on the podcast, or just want to reach out, you can do so by emailing me at johnson.business.yt@gmail.com. With that out of the way, please sit back, relax, and enjoy. Perfect. Okay, so Geoff, thanks a million for joining me today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Someone I've been, I suppose, what would be the word I'd use to describe, heavily binging your content at the moment, as I think a lot of people are, given the sort of recent, popularity and success your channel has been getting. I suppose maybe this question is a little bit null and void. I don't know. Some people have really great stories behind, the name of their channel or whatnot. And some people just kind of say, well, I just threw it into a random generator and that's what I got. But where did Geoff Plays Guitar come from?
So maybe the most obvious answer to this is I play guitar. And I was looking for a name. Like I've done a bunch of different channels in the past, and I've had a lot of different like overly thought names where I just put too much time, and then they ended up kind of sounding silly at the end. And like I look back on it and I'm like, I was so concerned about like having something that kind of checks all the boxes. And then this time around I was like, I just want something that is simple and is going to be flexible, and I was a little bit worried when I first picked the name, because shortly before a lot of the Doom stuff, you might notice that I've been doing some other styles of music on my channel. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, if like the orchestral stuff picks up, this would make no sense anymore. So I'm like, I'm really thankful that that's the case. I'm also one of those people like, I don't think names matter that much unless they're like kind of really hard to pronounce. So I just wanted something that was kind of easy to read, easy to remember, easy for me I could look at it and be like, that's still true, and that's pretty much it. I didn't spend days thinking about it.
Yeah, and just on that as well, because I remember when I was looking back at some of your older videos, I know some of your beginning tracks on YouTube are from your old high school band, Chaos Before Creation, and in one of the descriptions, I think for the first video, it's Geoff played guitar in this or something. So I was kind of thinking, exactly. was the name of the channel always that from, say, the beginning back in 2010, or did you, the way change it halfway through or something?
No, it wasn't that at all. When I first started putting up regular content, this was like pretty much the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Mm-hmm. I decided I was going to spend some more time on YouTube. I had a lot of time, Mm-hmm. So I had a different channel name, and I decided to change that and create some new social media. I just wanted to start fresh. And I had a bunch of other videos on that channel as well, but I removed that stuff. And then I kept the old band stuff up only because I knew that guys from my old band were still listening to it. And there was a time, actually, this was really wishful thinking, because obviously it didn't pan out, but we were considering getting back together after like 10 or 12 years and doing like a reunion show in our local area. Mm-hmm. And we started kind of pushing the songs, and people were using them for my channel, on the Chaos Before Creation page. And I started relearning some of the songs. This was before I started doing any of the real like Geoff Plays Guitar stuff. Mm-hmm. And we keep pushing it. It's still on the calendar like infinitely in the future, but it just keeps getting pushed back and pushed back. I don't know if we'll do it. I hope we do. It'd be fun, but
yeah, because It'd certainly be nice to see, because usually whenever someone tells me about well, our equivalent over here is secondary school, but like whenever usually somebody tells me about, you know, a band they did in school, usually most of the time it tends to be quite bad, and you know, people have learned since then. But like listening to your stuff, like I could genuinely imagine listening to that as just a normal everyday album. Granted, I say this
Yeah.
with the utmost respect. I don't think the style that you guys go for is mainly my cup of tea half the time, but you know,
Yeah, that's fair.
it says a
Yeah.
lot that I can still listen to it and enjoy it, even though it's not sort of my, I suppose, genre.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for context there, like we were huge fans. This was like 2010s metalcore era.
Mhm.
We were like Killswitch Engage was like our favorite band ever. You know, like we were listening, and these guys were actually I've seen them kind of recently, which is funny. And so a lot of these guys, these bands in that similar era were All That Remains was another one. And we kind of wanted to make music like that. At the end of the day, we had a big age range. That's another thing, is like some of the people in our band were like at the time were like 30. So like we kind of, you know, I was super young, and that's part of what it is like when you have a bunch of kids, like not everybody is going to be good, but when you we just kind of picked a random group, which was neat. And then the other thing about that is that only one other person in that band is actually doing stuff musically on a regular basis. It's the drummer. If you've heard of the band Currents, it's kind of a big as a metal band. I'm not exactly sure what the genre is, but they were touring a lot last year and stuff. And Matt Young is the drummer, the full-time drummer of that band, and he was the drummer for Chaos Before Creation. So it's really cool to see him. Like he's living the dream that we all were hoping to do in high school. He was the only one who actually did it. And I'm in second place, like doing cool YouTube stuff, but I'm literally not doing anything except I'm not leaving my house. You know, it's like it's a different life.
Not yet, anyways. Not yet.
No, we'll see.
Yeah, so obviously, you know, you talk about the band a little bit, and obviously that leans more towards metal, as we talked about. You know, was that your initial sort of introduction to music, or was it more of a classical line you went down first of all? And kind of, obviously you play guitar, but are there any other instruments you play alongside that?
Primarily guitar player. When I was much younger, I started on the drums for a little while, and I moved to guitar because there was an electric guitar in my house when I was maybe 15, you know, at that time when you're really discovering kind of like your identity and stuff. And I wouldn't put it down. That was like, I was every single day, I was just playing and playing. Like, I think of that Bon Jovi song about play until your fingers bleed. Like, that's exactly what I was doing. Like, you know, it's, and I couldn't stop. And I come from a pretty musical family. Like, my mom is a full-time middle school music teacher. My brother is a full-time music teacher and vocalist, and does some kind of like professional contract gig stuff on the side. My dad is he's a musician. He's basically going to retire and start touring the US. Like it's pretty amazing. And him and I talk about mixing and mastering because he's making his own albums now. So it's funny. He's like an old school mixing mastering guy. It's like he's a Cubase guy. I'm an Ableton guy. Like it's funny to talk about it. So I guess I have a pretty musical background. It has been in my family for a long time. Besides guitar, I can fake it on the piano. You know, I can sort of do the drums, but I would never be caught dead playing live. You know, I'd never play in a band with those. But it's enough for me to do like the computer stuff.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, I think your general talent shows, you know, across in some of your videos, because a lot of your content that you've started creating through, you know, COVID and whatnot has been adaptations of already existing songs, but into different styles or genres and putting your own twist on it, which is fantastic. And
yeah.
I think a lot of people seem to undersell the value in that, because some people just think like, oh, well, this song's already here and he's just changing a few bits. But, you know, it actually takes a lot of, you know, time and dedication and a really good musical ear as well, I would say, to go back and identify, you know, especially certain notes and cadences and, you know, the way in note progression and whatnot. And you've obviously done a fantastic job at that. Is that down to sort of, you know, just pure experience with music over the years, or did you kind of study music theory a little bit when you were younger as well?
Yeah, I have like a layman's understanding of music theory. I never went to music school. I lean on my brother a lot, actually, for a lot of that stuff. But I got a lot of experience doing the Final Fantasy covers, because for the first time, I think like when you make a lot of like rock music, like I started off doing rock and metal and I was playing in the band, you get really good at making that one style and you like understand, you know, the verse chorus structure and you understand like the minor scale, because that's pretty much everything. And power chords, and, you know, I was playing like I think like I learned like Green Day and like Avenged Sevenfold and I'll get back to Avenged Sevenfold in a bit because I think they actually they're a big influence for a couple of reasons. But when I started doing the Final Fantasy remixes recently, the thing about Uematsu is he is like he never went to music school, but he is like a music nerd in the best sense. Like he understands it so well that he likes to flex a little bit and break out of the box, and you can hear it in a lot of the soundtracks. And so when I'm deciphering, because I do it all by ear, so like I'll take the song and I'll just listen to it, I'll figure out the tempo, and then I'll like map out kind of generally how it goes like on the keyboard or something like that. And especially Genova from Final Fantasy VII, like that was the first time I was like, God, this changes keys constantly. And I ended up going back at one point. I never published anything about this, but I went back at one point and I tried to understand actually what was happening. And I had to go down this YouTube rabbit hole. I learned so much. And then I made my own, like, I practiced my own version of that. I made this little electronic track that did all this key modulation. And I was like, this is the coolest thing. And I had no idea about any of this stuff. And this is music theory. You get taught this in school, but it's like learning on the job, you know? Like I didn't really have that. So, you know, when it comes down to a lot of the music that I'm making, and I used to talk about having an ear and things like that, I'd say the most of it is about experience. Because I've been doing music recording and writing songs and remixing, and also I've been doing this for like 15 years. And all 15 of those years, I'm learning something new. Most of it was like learning the tools and getting a good mix and things like that. And then eventually when you start feeling comfortable with that, that's the moment for me anyway, where I was like, I'm going to try to do better at actually like writing music and arranging things. Now that I'm dealing with soundtrack music, that's far beyond what I know. Yeah. So that's pretty much how it went.
Yeah. Well, the experience definitely shows on your half, because I myself, you know, I play piano, a couple of Irish traditional instruments, and I've only started recently trying to learn the guitar. But, you know, even with that, you know, I still cannot fathom, you know, even trying to work my head around all this different stuff. And the furthest I've ever gotten is recognizing a leitmotif in a different song that represents something else. And that's the closest I've gone to jumping down the rabbit hole. But I think maybe one day it will happen.
I hope so.
But let's kind of talk a little bit more about, we've talked a little bit about your band in high school, and then obviously you're now doing a lot more games composition, soundtrack stuff.
Yeah.
Two very different sort of paths in music for anyone who kind of knows it, because, you know, game music is obviously a lot more dependent on the player in certain elements. I think soundtrack stuff is kind of, it leans a little bit more into the traditional sense, because there's a lot more music control in that sense. And the same goes for sort of traditional sort of band music as well. But, you know, when did you kind of make that leap over to games composition music?
Yeah, I'd say very recently. Like, the pandemic was a big reason. I had a lot of time to kind of think about what I wanted to do in a career and how I want to approach making music. Because it's always been like a fun hobby. And the idea of making a lot of original music that's just like band stuff or like releasing singles, you know, the kind of the popularity hustle type of thing. I've done it for years, and I know a lot of other people who do it, and it's kind of a miserable experience. Like 99% of people don't really get anywhere. And it's really hard to make that work and be healthy and do other things. But it's really funny. Like, I've had a professional career outside of music, and it's a lot of client work, and that's something that I'm really comfortable with. And the more I dig into it, the more I realize that being somebody who can work in game music, game composition, game audio, or being like a full-time person at, you know, a company like Sony or id is much closer to that. It's a lot of working with other people. It's a lot of trying to understand the needs. And then you bring your expertise as a musician and as an audio person in there to help them realize their vision. And you have all the tools and the knowledge. It's like, the only reason you're getting hired to do this kind of stuff is because those people who are already there feel like they're not good enough to do it, or feel like they don't have the time to do it. Because think about Toby Fox. Like, Toby Fox did it all. You know what I mean? He could have hired somebody else to do it, but he was in a situation where he felt like the best choice was to do it himself. That's not the same in all of these other places, especially bigger companies where you tend to split the work up. You know, you don't have a lot of these like multi job people who do it all. You know, you have one composer and a couple of sound designers and a bunch of software engineers and a couple of artists, and like that kind of structure I feel really comfortable in. So I thought about it for a while and I was like, this feels like a good application. Now all I have to do is learn it, because I really just haven't done anything about that. So that's a lot of what this YouTube stuff is about. It's a detailed journey. It's entertaining, but it's a journey that it's me learning how to get good at doing music that fits into games and understanding styles. And I'm getting way better at sound design. But we can talk more about that. I think, you know, I'm sure we'll touch on it more, but that's the short version.
Yeah, no, because I like that you brought up the you know, the sort of the multifaceted aspect of, you know, having to work with a team, because I feel like a lot of people when they think about composition, I think everyone just assumes John Williams, even he just goes into a room, composes a bit, you know, and then like conducts it and then he's done. But for especially in games wise, I think it's really important to note, because I was listening there recently to a podcast. Austin Wintory was on it. I'm not sure if you're aware of who he is. And he was kind of mentioning that, you know, when he was getting started off in games, like, you know, people would just be kind of, if they were there, they would be asked to do the music. It was just whoever had even the tiniest semblance of music theory. And now it's very much, I think, kind of exploring out into this greater world. You know, we've seen people like Hans Zimmer come into the gaming industry and, you know, try his hand at, say, I think Modern Warfare 2 is one of them. The old Crysis games, particularly Crysis 2.
Oh, yeah.
Which are fantastic scores. But one thing that really kind of strikes chord is, you know, with regards to teamwork, is that, as you mentioned, audio design, you're always constantly working with the audio team. It's not just the music. And I think particularly, you know, a great way of looking at this is there's very few people that do both audio design and music. I think Darren Korb is the one that comes to mind, because he obviously does all that for Supergiant Games. I think he even does voice acting now at this stage, so he's just an all-around powerhouse. So
he's amazing.
But even I was
nicest guy.
Yeah, he seems absolutely amazing as well. But there was, I was talking to Gareth Coker in a previous interview I did a couple of months back, and he was saying how vital it is to, you know, be always in constant communication with your audio team, because you need to know for audio cues when music is coming in, and it overall I think adds to the great experience. So you're dead right in regards to needing to be a good team player when it comes to music. I suppose I went off on a little bit of a tangent there.
No.
But let's talk a little bit about your channel and kind of when you started. Obviously back in 2010, but as you mentioned, you know, you kind of really got into it during. You really got into it during.
This is COVID hair. Yeah. This is,
don't start.
It was very short, about a year ago.
Yeah, no, I'm still in COVID at the moment, and thankfully, I'm living with my parents at the moment, but my mum was able to at least give me some bit of a cut. I don't know how bad it is at the moment, but it could be a lot worse.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's so talking about your channel again, you obviously got back into it a year recently. There's a lot of different ways you could kind of approach going into the games industry with regards to music. You know, I know a lot of people tend to angle themselves primarily towards, you know, posting on, say, SoundCloud or Spotify first, and then YouTube's kind of an afterthought. But you put a lot of work into your explainer videos surrounding the music in which you create. So what kind of is the inspiration behind that? And first of all, why did you decide to then get back into YouTube?
Yeah. I have spent a lot of time on other channels. I think like the one thing that I like about YouTube is in certain cases it'll work for you. So one of my big goals here is like, I'm not necessarily trying to be like a YouTube personality. Like it's cool that the numbers are growing and I'm getting more traction, but my ultimate goal is really, it's not necessarily to be a full-time YouTuber. But it is a way to show, it has a little bit of social proof along with it. Like if people like the stuff that I'm doing, I can say to people that I'd be interested in working with, like, people like what I'm doing, they're going to be looking out for that music. You know, let's work together, you know? YouTube, I think when I first started on YouTube, I was not posting long versions of videos. I wasn't explaining stuff. I was making the music and I was putting it on there, but I was also putting it on every channel. One thing that did get me really interested in YouTube was at the time I was talking a lot with some other friends of mine who were doing YouTube. They were doing Twitch and YouTube, so a lot of like gaming streamers. And the group of people that was watching those Final Fantasy videos at the beginning tended to be YouTube people, so it kind of just stuck there. But one thing that I noticed was YouTube likes certain kinds of videos, and I was mostly like, my goal was, it is to make music, but it's also to grow the channel. Like I did want the exposure there. So I needed to find a better format for the music. And what's really funny is my hunch about what works on YouTube turned out to be exactly correct pretty much right out the gate, which is really amazing. Like I was doing a lot of these songs, they're, a couple minutes long, and I've heard that YouTube, they care about watch time, which is kind of related to the length of the video. They care about click-through rate. They care about people rewatching, how many likes and comments, things like that. And I've seen some channels, completely different types of content, do this really well. And I knew that my draw was going to be if the music sounded good, but there was going to be a subset of people who were interested in how music gets made, even if they're not necessarily musicians, although a lot of them are. And those people were going to watch the video, rewatch the video, probably look at some other things that I do. And I was like, this seems like a good format. And let's make it short and interesting. Like, there's so many things to explain, but let's make it kind of more entertaining. Let's not get into the details too much, but let's make it fun to watch. Let's make the narrative of the video very like crisp, and not a lot of things get drawn out or dragged out. And I just tried all that stuff because I'd seen other channels do it. And I got really lucky because it turns out that Doom and Hades were both on people's minds. And I think the search volume for that was really high. So all of a sudden, like, I did that one video, first one that I did that was more than 10 minutes long, and it was just like, boop. And I haven't topped it yet, but that's okay. Like, I know that, certain videos tend to do 10x or 100x better than other videos. Totally fine. But at that moment, I was like, okay, I think I'm on the right track. Let's keep doing this. Let's not worry too much about releasing stuff as often, as long as I get the format right and I get the quality right. And that seems to be working. So I'm kind of sticking with that for the time being.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the Doom/Hades video, because that was the first one that I was exposed to on your channel. And I think as a lot of people who maybe played Doom Eternal first and then kind of heard about Hades maybe at the back of their mind, or when it came up to award season, looking at the same sort of similar art style, you almost assumed it was going to be sort of a Mick Gordon sort of esque soundtrack before even looking at it.
Right. Yeah.
So that's why that's what drew it to me, and I was like, oh, I've always wanted to hear what some of these songs would look like. And that's not to discredit, Darren's score, because it's fantastic as well. But this thing of like trying to mesh different styles together, see how different composer would approach something. Like I'm not I haven't played Cyberpunk, but I know now that whenever I hear chipping in, I'm just going to think of your song because I haven't heard it yet properly.
But I mean, totally right. That's really amazing. Like I played Hades first, actually, and so the whole time I was just like, like, this is good. But then I like compared the two when I was listening to the Eternal soundtrack after, and I was just like, Darren, you could have done more here. You could have. But I know, again, like, his style is Darren Korb's style. And like when I deep dived into that and watched the videos and stuff, like, you get a good sense of like where that influence comes from. And as an original score, he nailed it. Like, at the end of the day, when I played Hades, and I put a lot of time into Hades, I really don't think that Doom sound would be the right answer, because I think that what Darren did captured it very well. Like, it's an intense game, but it's not the kind of intense where your ears need to bleed. It's more of like a stylized intense, and a rock feel, like going super, super metal. He did actually, there's one song where there's a lot of guitar solos and stuff, and he gave it a try, but that one feels like it's the edge of where it could go. Like if the art style was a little more gory, you know what I mean? If it was a little more like Doom Eternal, then maybe. But I think that's the great thing about Mick and Darren, is they're both so good at kind of understanding what that atmosphere needs to be through the music, that they take it exactly where it needs to go. So it's a cool experiment, but at the end of the day, it's also why, like, well, I'll talk about this in a sec, about my relationship and what I want to do, but we'll get there.
I think it's really important as well, because you bring up another point that kind of springs to mind is, it's easy for a composer. I think nowadays it's easy for games composers. I don't think there's a single bad music score in gaming. I don't think you can look at a score and think it's bad, but it takes a lot for a composer to create a score that's both good and also fits the theme of the game, both visually and style wise and whatnot. And I think Hades one definitely is perfect fit for that, and Doom is perfect fit for it. But again, it is always nice to kind of take them out of that scenario and put them, like as you have, into sort of something new and try it like that.
Yeah, totally.
So looking at your channel, obviously you've been growing a lot recently. I think you just surpassed over 20,000 subscribers. You've got a very active fan base, and you're very good at keeping in contact with them. I think this interview is a prime example of that. But how do you sort of anticipate, how you'll be able to continue to interact with your growing audience as it gets bigger and bigger?
Yeah, I mean, there comes a point on every platform where things become a fire hose. Like you get to a certain number, like a couple of thousand or 10, especially actually YouTube is a great example right now. I'm only at 20,000 and my phone is nonstop blowing up. Like it's because every comment shows up, and this is why people hire like community managers, like it's because it's a full-time job to manage that stuff. So the way that I think about it is, I think it's generally understood that at a certain size, people are not as likely to respond. Like I don't blame people. Like there's like Alex McCalla, like really well-known Final Fantasy orchestral composer, moving into some funk stuff now, which is really cool. And he has a ton, like every tweet is like instantly within 10 minutes has like 300 likes and like 50 replies. And I'm like, the fact that he can respond is great, but there's no way he can keep up as a single person. Like, and I think that's understood, and people are still willing to reply and hope that they can get a response, or reply to kind of show their audience that they're replying. Like, I think a lot of the comments in my YouTube channel are not necessarily for me. They're for kind of people in the comment section who are reading, which is great. Like, I can't be, I think it's unrealistic for me to be able to get to everything all the time. That being said, at the moment, like my Instagram and my Twitter are not that. Like they're wide open. They're pretty dry. Like I'll respond to everything right now because I'm less than 1,000 on both. So, if you really want to talk to me, all the other channels are great. And it actually shows that like, I think there's like a next step of effort. Like I tend to prioritize the channels that get the least traffic because it says that people are like, they really want to reach out and they're like thinking about how can I get in front of this person? And I'm like, okay, great. Message me on Instagram, message me on Twitter, email me. I'm really good about responding on that. At some point it tends to get busier. So I'll do my best to set expectations as things do. But I think this is a common problem, like, I don't know the perfect answer. I'll ask somebody if it ever happens. I'll be like, what do we do? Like, how do you do this? So we'll see. But again, like, I'm not counting on it. Like, it could be like this forever. Like, so, I don't want to treat it like I can't respond to stuff. And I love responding to stuff. I love the conversation. So as much as possible, I would like to.
We touched on this a little bit earlier, but obviously, we mentioned that your Doom Eternal style remixes of songs have been, doing extraordinarily well on YouTube at the moment. Do you kind of worry being a composer? And obviously, some of your older stuff, as you mentioned, is not quite, that same style. Do you worry that maybe you'll kind of get known as, well, for lack of pun intended, the Doom guy when it comes to making music? Or is that something you don't really worry about too much?
I do worry about it. Yeah. I mean, it's a thing. It's unfortunately like the rule of like algorithmic channel growth is you tend to get good at one thing and stick with it, and it's going to grow your channel because you've now associated a brand with it. But I think the balance there is, if I do want to pivot into other things, I need to just be aware of who my audience is the whole time, like as much as I want to be known as like the Doom guy, I think that, or I don't want to be, stuck as like, this washed up, like give it 5 years and it's like, oh, I'm still making Doom stuff. Like we're over that. You know what I mean? What I want to do is have different avenues in the content where I can start trying to kind of like, I can pivot a little bit eventually. And once I start covering a little bit more and I try out things, like it's good to just keep experimenting. Eventually I think it becomes a little fuzzier, and then it becomes more about maybe, this guy does a lot of different styles, but he'll always dive really deep into a specific style. You know what I mean? Or something like that. Cause that's what I'm doing with Mick. It's like, besides it being like incredibly annoying, probably. Like, he's probably watching this like, dude, this guy's so creepy. What I'm doing is I'm going in and going like, what do I need to do to fully understand this? And then how can I share that with people? And I think that applies to lots of things. And Doom is a really cool way to do it. It's like a great start. But I'm already getting a lot of comments in the YouTube videos about trying some other styles as well, because I think people realize that that's kind of where I'm going. Like, it's not about just kind of creating this cheap veneer about, making videos about Doom. It's like, it's more about, can I do this crazy thing, and it's that, or like I get a job in the industry and I don't have to worry so much about it, because I think that's my ultimate goal. Like, as much as I think that's the biggest thing that I'm worried about, is like, if I start looking for work or start finding opportunities for work in that space more actively, I would hate to come off as like this one trick pony, like, hey, do you need like a metal soundtrack? Not that I can't do it, because I think that would be an interesting bridge to be like, you have like a boomer shooter, like, let's do it, or some intense game, like, let's find a way to make this intense soundtrack, because I can make intense music. That seems to be the direction I'm going. But I wouldn't want to be recognized as like, this person is not fit for that type of role because he's just been overly focused on copying someone else's work. I don't think that's where I want to go. And I'm trying to build a brand that shows that that's not the case. But, I don't have any of the right answers, so I don't really know.
Yeah, you've teed me up perfectly for a segue anyways into my next question, which is, I suppose, obviously at the end of all your videos, you mentioned that, you hope one day to get into the games industry and games composition in particular. Since your videos have started to take off a little bit, or even just before they started to take off, have you had any sort of developers or anyone in the gaming industry reach out to you, indie or otherwise, to do composition?
I've had some people reach out. The thing is that I haven't been able to take any of those roles, mostly because my problem is time right now. Like, I need to pay the bills. Like, the music stuff actually takes a long time. YouTube takes these videos and the music that goes along with it take 30 hours a week, maybe, on top of how I'm already kind of making money. Like, I'm not making a living on music right now. Like, I'll say that right out. I'm paying the bills with other stuff. And this is something that I'd love to pivot into. But in order to do that, I need to know that I'll be able to like eat, and like make rent. So I just haven't, I've been kind of asking like, hey, what's the deal with this? Like, is this one of those, like, we'll make money if we make money on Steam kind of deals? Cause like, I feel way more comfortable doing it like contract website work or contract design work or some other like technical thing where it's like, if you want this from them, you pay them to do it. And then like whether or not it works is like your problem. Like, like you wouldn't just be like, hey, come on board and like, we'll pay you like if we get customers. Cause they're like, nah, like I'll go find something else. And so that's, it's like, I'll just tell you, like, I'm 30. Like, I need to like have a roof over my head, like my priorities have changed as I've gotten older. So, but that also means that I need to be excellent at what I do, or else like that need to be like, hey, like pay me up front. And like, we'll work together. Like if I'm not actually like the best at what I do, nobody's going to do that. So it's a double-edged sword. Like I have to get good, like, or be really good, in order to justify that. So I am a little worried about that. Like it's very possible, like I'll never get there. And people will be like, look, it's really cool you do YouTube and, things sound okay, but like there's 55 other people that are just way better and way more qualified. And like, that's okay. Like if I'm 40 and that's what I'm still getting, like I'm done, like I'll go back and do something else. Dead serious. Like, can't dwell on it if it's not going to work, but it's worth a try right now. So we'll see.
100%. And I think the most important thing about a lot of it is a lot of people would say that they really want to get into the industry in regards to different bits, but they'll never really make that step. And I think the way you're approaching it is quite unique in the sense that you're creating content on a regular basis. Whereas, some people will say, well, once I get a job, I'll start making music and then I'll have this to kind of use as a reference. But you're, going out of your way, making your own content. And that's almost more impressive for, I think, at least from my own perspective, for a lot of employers, because they'll see that you're making the initiative to, first of all, go out and do something without having to be told to do it. And particularly as well, I think you're showing great depth of ability in music as well to do so many different styles. I know for a lot of people, funnily enough, one of the things that always comes up whenever I've spoken to a composer is they love getting stuff like Minecraft to do music composition for, because usually when they get music for that, it's always that they'll get a DLC pack to do in some very particular style. I know there's like an Asian expansion DLC or a sort of a Game of Thrones style or Star Wars, so they'll always have to experiment with different styles of music. So you've kind of got bite-sized stuff for that in a sense, not in the traditional sense, but more so on YouTube side, which I think is really interesting. And one thing I didn't notice until after I kind of saw your video is, I kind of feel like there's a growing sort of demand for, original composition stuff on YouTube. I think not even just original composition, but getting music to people that maybe isn't available. Like there'll be times where I'll hear like a specific variation of it. Like I think one good example is the new Batman movie that's coming out. The Something in the Way by Nirvana is playing that, but it's a different variation of that song. And, it's not readily available. It's not on Nirvana's album or whatnot. But, people have composed it in that style, and you get pretty much a one-to-one replica. And I think even just showing the way in which people create music, I know a very particular good example of this is Junkie XL is doing, I think he does his studio time sections, which is where he breaks down different themes or pieces he's done within movies, which I think is a fantastic way of also reaching out to a broader audience as a composer. Again, I kind of we touched on Avenged Sevenfold earlier, just out at the beginning. And again, they're another band I think that have had their music featured in various other gaming soundtracks at some point or another. But one thing I kind of want to, this will kind of lead into it, but traditionally speaking, who are your music inspirations? And then game wise, who are your music inspirations? Do they kind of overlap, or are they very much separate?
Yeah. Traditionally speaking, Avenged Sevenfold is one. I mean, it's because when I was first learning guitar, a lot of those influences were guitar-oriented bands. So it's what brought me to heavy metal. That's why I really got into it, because those were like where the elite guitar players were. Not that like Jimmy Page isn't great, but like he's not Eddie Van Halen. He's not Michelangelo Beto. I don't know if you ever heard of that guy, but he's got a double neck guitar and he just does this, and he's nasty. And it's like, that's the kind of stuff, like that flair, that like extreme guitar. Like I wanted to go as far as guitar could go, and then like work towards that, right? And that's what made me love like shred guitar and all sorts of like really kind of hard to play stuff. And Avenged Sevenfold was one of the earlier ones. I had heard them on the radio, believe it or not, like back when, like they were in, like City of Evil was on pop radio, which I think is amazing because that never would ever happen. Like Backcountry, I was listening to like a local pop radio station, Backcountry came on, and I was like, what is this? And I was like, it's amazing. And that's like, that really stepped me over the edge. And what's awesome is they won an award for that album. Still probably one of my favorite albums. What made them very influential is, that Sinister Gates is his dad is a jazz guy, and he's very well trained, and if you watch him play guitar and stuff, he's super knowledgeable. He's not just like a shred machine. Like he plays a lot of genres, and that was really inspirational for me. Another band that I really like is Scar Symmetry. Per Nilsson is, I think, maybe the best guitar player that I've ever seen ever. And I would fight somebody about that. Like he's unbelievable, and sometimes really underappreciated. He's playing for Meshuggah right now. So anybody who's really big into like the industrial stuff, like he's your man. He's an unbelievable guitar player. And then Periphery, more recently, I think like if you like the gent scene, like they're the group to go for. They have, I mean, everybody's amazing. They also do a lot of electronic stuff, which I think is cool. They are what I would consider like a great example of tight studio musicians who can play live, but like the magic is often in the studio with them. And so you can see it with like Nolly, Get Good Drums and a lot of these other tools that and the Horizon devices, like they have a huge audience of people buying their hardware and their software because they've shown that they are innovative in the studio, which again, as somebody who does a lot of studio work, really influential, really worth following. speaking of electronic stuff, I did a lot of electronic music. I'd say over the last like 10 years. When I was in college, I got into electronic music, and this was at the time when like Skrillex like just started releasing. What was the one with the alien on the front? I'm trying to remember the name of that album. No, I can't remember. But and then like Diplo, he did something with Diplo, the Jack U stuff. That was all around the time that I was in college. And I ate that stuff up, and I used a lot of that as references. I was really into... I'm a huge Zed fan, even though he does a ton of pop stuff right now. But at the time, I remember this. I was sitting in a dorm room in college, and I found a thread that talked about Zed just winning a remix contest at the time for one of Skrillex's songs that he did with The Doors. Mm-hmm. And that was like the beginning of his career, because Skrillex was like, bring this guy on, we're going to do a bunch of stuff together. And Zed ended up absolutely blowing him away over the year. Like, he's way more successful than Skrillex. But I've watched him because Zed used to play in a prog metal band. So like, I was like, this guy's amazing, right? And then the guys Gray that he brought on I remember one of the guys from Gray, his brother used to be in a band called Singularity, who were big, like, he was doing a bunch of SoundCloud stuff. I had done a remix contest for him at one point, which is really funny. I didn't win, but I got close. And so seeing all these people move through the industry is really crazy. And so I remember, like, I wanted to be them so bad. And a couple of other shout outs, like, still to this day, I use as mix references. I consider these guys wizards. Cone Sound, absolute wizards. Mm-hmm. And Noisia, I think, is, they're just like, they're the OGs. Like, they, nobody can beat them. And I'm right now, actually, I just ordered Outer Edges on vinyl. Like, I came around back to it. I was like, this is the best album on the planet. And it's the weirdest album too. But from a sound design perspective, you're like, there's so much to listen to in there. So those are my traditional influences. I know I kind of went off on a tangent there. But there's a ton. Like, I just love all types of music, really. And for game music, the guys that I still try to pick out stuff from, Jason Graves, I'm like obsessed with. So Jason Graves did the Tomb Raider, he did Dead Space, and he's done a couple of movies and things like that. And what I love about him is he's like a texture guy. Like, if you've seen the behind the scenes of his studio, he's got this little house behind another house that's completely packed with instruments and things to make sound with. Like, it looks like an attic. Like, he looks like a hoarder, but he's got like sorry, Jason Graves. Like, that's what it looks like. He had tons of so much stuff to make every type of sound with. And then he's got this amazing little basement studio. And so that's where I learned a lot of, like, just kind of silly ideas to make, like, custom sounds with. Another guy, a little more traditional, Trevor Morris. He was an understudy for Hans Zimmer. He's really known for, like, Dragon Age and the new Castlevania on Netflix, which is so good. And then I wanted to... recently I've been really into... I mentioned it in a video. Daniel Deluxe, the guy who did the Ghost Runner soundtrack. That soundtrack is amazingly good. And it, like... When I was listening to the Cyberpunk soundtrack, I was really hoping it was going to be the Ghost Runner soundtrack, because I listened to Ghost Runner and I was like, this thing bangs. Like, this is so much... It's just like... It's like the Cyber Doom. Like, it just has every... it's just a... Like, the tension is there, and like it's a little more electronic dance music, but I think the gameplay, he just nailed it. Like, I have that on loop sometimes. It's like I listen to it like sometimes I used to listen to like DJ sets from like Knife Party, and like now it's like Daniel Deluxe on repeat. Like, it's so good.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I never hear his name get actually brought up enough, I think. So it's nice that he kind of gets a shout out, because I know Ghost Runner especially was huge, I think, in the Doom community when it first came out, because it was sort of, I think, scratching that similar itch that Doom does of just non-stop constant gameplay. So it's nice to maybe something like that we could expect in the future, maybe a sort of in a Ghost Runner soundtrack in maybe a Doom style, or maybe even just some other style, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. The thing about that soundtrack is, and this is, I think, one challenging part about doing these songs, is a lot of times in soundtrack music, you get like these atmospheric looping style stuff where it's great for gameplay, but there's nothing really stand out about the song itself. Like if you played it, if you've played the games, you might be like, oh, I know what this is from. But if you've never played any of the games that you hear the soundtracks for, that have like a Ghost Runner style soundtrack, or sometimes a Cyberpunk style soundtrack in a lot of cases, it just kind of sounds like music, but the melodies, like it just doesn't, it's very different from, say, pop music or like traditionally written songs with like hooks and choruses and things like that. It is worth mentioning that I think this is what makes the Doom Eternal soundtrack and the Doom soundtrack stand out so much, because Mick specifically said, I like to write music in a verse chorus style like a song, but then he breaks it up to work for the gameplay. But he's still thinking about it like a song. So it has a hook and it has verse parts and it has variation that feels like a song. So that's why when you put it back together into the soundtrack, you're like, dude, BFG Division is amazing. You know what I mean? Because he's got the hooks in there because he's thinking about it like a traditional rock song or something, which is also probably great that he's working with rock bands and metal bands now, because like he gets it, but that can be a challenge when trying to move it over, like doing something in the style of Doom. I'm not going to add new hooks for things that don't already exist, because if it's not that memorable in the first place, like it feels like a tough sell. So I do hand pick the songs based on things that are memorable enough that I can keep those hooks in, but change the texture of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think you're kind of striking a chord anyways with regards to Mick Gordon. That's one of the things I'm going to be really disappointed about, is the fact that he's left that sort of sphere now. And I don't even know if we'll ever get his iteration of the Doom Eternal soundtrack, because I know we had a lot of problem with the mixing, particularly on the first release, because they kind of rushed it out. Right. I think in fairness though, to id Software, they did very well with getting in Andrew Hulshult and David Levy, who are two fantastic composers. But I think, nothing. It's incredibly difficult to match, I think, Mick Gordon with regards to anything. I think his work on Wolfenstein as well is fantastic, and even Prey. This is a good question, and this is one I kind of, more of just sort of a fun question that I wanted to include in. If there was any sort of soundtrack from a game to date, that you could maybe pick out and recompose, which would you pick and why?
Let me think. This is a tough question. Okay, I think it goes, so what sounds like the obvious answer based on my channel is like, I would love to do a Doom soundtrack, right? I actually don't think I would want to do that. And the reason is because getting at first Mick Gordon, I think, was the right call. Like, I'd rather just Mick Gordon do more of the soundtracks. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need to redo it, because that's why everybody's like, dude, this music's so good. But I don't think it's worth trying to emulate him either. Like, I would want to do something that I feel like needs a different approach, like really cool to try to do Doom, but I'll never live up to that. Like that, he's far superior in everything. So, scratch that one off the list. That being said though, games that have like a certain kind of intensity, would be fun, or have like a really awesome need for sound design. So games that come to mind are, I think, Control would be a really fun one. However, I did look up who did the Control soundtrack, and the two guys that worked together on it, one of them did Quantum Break and the other one did Limbo. And if you just multiply those two together, it's Control. And I'm like, that's perfect. I did neither of those games. So those guys, again, way better fit probably. But I think the process of doing a game like Control would be really fun. We mentioned Crysis. Any sci-fi shooter I think would be really, really fun, because both Halo and Crysis have they kind of have this like movie score sound to them. But what if they didn't, like what if it was much more computer driven, much more sound design driven? It's not a natural sound. It's a sci-fi, like there's no reason why it has to be like this epic cinematic thing. It could be something totally new and different. I think that would be a really fun one to explore. Or any kind of sci-fi general thing. Something like Mirror's Edge might be fun. Again, super intense game. It's very similar to Ghost Runner, so you could do kind of your own twist on that. I played Strike Vector X not too long ago. I don't know if you ever played that game, but high intensity like mech flight game. Again, really great one. I think it would benefit from some high intensity music. Those Yeah. You know that feeling when you accidentally walk your character off the ledge of something, like just and you just tighten up. You're like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that feeling is what basically the entire Doom soundtrack is. And that's the kind of feeling that I would want to recreate with soundtracks. Like I think that intensity and that kind of tension and anticipation would be great, and not always in like a power fantasy kind of way, which is kind of what Doom does. Like it's not a scary game. It's the guitars come on and now you're awesome kind of game. It's high. It's intense, but it's not the kind of intense that like Dead Space is. Dead Space is scary and intense. I think I'd want more of the arcade intense, like let's get a feeling of like every challenge is doable, even though it's going to be hard, as opposed to, oh my God, this boss is so huge. Like that's not the feeling that I would want. Before going too deep, it is worth thinking about like what would Doom be like if instead of doing everything from the perspective of the Doom Slayer kicking butt, to be instead from the perspective of there's way too many demons and this boss is really scary, and like, because that soundtrack would sound totally different. It would probably sound closer to like a Dead Space, where every time you see a boss or some huge demon, it's like the music is like, oh my God, what are you gonna do? But that's not the sound. The sound is meat hook, like go kick this guy's butt. You know what I mean? That's a very different feeling. I like that feeling better than I think I like the scary stuff.
I think the one great thing about game soundtrack is, it can be so simple for certain games and still be as good as the most complex soundtrack you can think of. Like an idea that pops to mind to me is I've been playing a lot recently, and it's something that I kind of grew up with as well, is Left 4 Dead. Has such a fantastic sound design element to its soundtrack. It's 2 notes on a piano and you're like, oh shit, there's a hunter around the corner. It's just but it's such a fantastic way of using music. But one question I kind of want to ask, and this will be kind of my final question now, is you mentioned Halo a little bit, and Halo has, of course, its very loud, bombastic drum set pieces. There's an awful lot of sort of downtime pieces as well. Like the main menu theme, specifically with the choral monks, is very much iconic to Halo, and it's by no means sort of this grandiose, intense soundtrack. Do you think that you particularly would prefer to do sort of a game that really focuses on intense, high-paced sort of music constantly, or would you maybe think about doing something that's maybe a little slower, maybe a little bit more orchestral, or is just kind of what's your feel on that?
I would be interested in doing something that has dynamics as well. I think like Halo especially, at the end of the day the campaign is like a story driven game, and so what you need is the ability to create the appropriate atmosphere with music for all of the situations that they're in. And I think some of the best composers can do it all. That's actually one of the reasons that who did the Square Enix, that they brought Jason Graves on for Tomb Raider, because while he could do a lot of the sound design, a lot of the scary stuff, and he did with Dead Space, he was apparently impressive with his ability to do the emotional stuff that a lot of these other guys didn't have a handle on. Like a lot of these other, I guess a lot of the people who applied were, they had a really interesting portfolio, but it didn't have a wide range of kind of emotional beats and moments. And Jason Graves was like, yeah, I can do like the sad piano thing. Like, that's cool. And he showed it, and it works really well. I think that's really the pinnacle, where you can bring your own style, but you also generally understand like almost a traditional soundtrack thing, where it's like, can you, with a limited set of options, like let's say you only have, I don't know, a 10-piece orchestra or something, this is kind of what you had to do back in the day when you had a limited budget. With the limited number of tools that you have, can you create a bunch of these different emotional moments? If you can do that, and you have the audio design stuff on the back burner for when you need it, I think you're in a really great spot. So while I don't have a ton of experience doing that stuff, I would love to work with somebody who does. Like, I'm not too proud to say that I would be totally fine with like an internship or an understudy. I just want to work with people who've done this before and learn, and like, cause it's what I want to do. Like well, I'm not going to live in a shack, but like, I will make big changes in my life if it means that I can work with people who've really truly done this and have a ton of experience and are known for this kind of thing. I'm just hungry to do that, because there's a lot I don't know. The YouTube stuff is fun. It's limited, but I don't expect Sony to hire me because I have no professional experience working in AAA games. Like, end of story. So I would need to find people who do and learn from them, and then we can go from there. So that's we'll see how that goes.
I think that's a very good note to end it on. And before we sort of finish up the interview, there's one thing people, at least my friends, always tell me that I'm awful for doing this sort of thing, but I always like to say, just to secure myself future interviews, and I got to say when, because I'm optimistic that you will one day do a games composition, whether it be indie or otherwise. But when you do compose your first piece, you have to promise me that you'll allow me to be the first person to interview you surrounding the soundtrack for that game.
Of course. No, of course I will.
Oh, well,
yeah,
perfect.
No problem at all.
Well, Geoff, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know you probably have loads to do, but it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Odin. This has been a great interview. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for listening. If you like what you heard, I'd be really grateful if you consider giving the video a like and subscribing to my channel. If you're listening to the episode on a podcasting platform, I'd really appreciate it if you could give the podcast a follow. Wishing you all the best and signing off.